Welcome, everybody. I'm Scott Patton, your host. This is Books Cafe, brought to you by www.free-ebooks.net. And the question today is, how many ideas and false starts does it take to settle on a story and eventually complete a novel? We're going to bring you the answer to that question today. But before we start, just want to let you know, head over to www.free-ebooks.net. This is where you're going to be finding some of the top up-and-coming authors, and you're going to be able to read their books for free. You're going to be able to download books, all sorts of fiction topics, nonfiction topics, academic books. We've even got audiobooks there for you. We've got over 5 million members, and our purpose is to, well, basically, you know, the big publishers, they want you to have a huge following. They want you to have a track record. And so if you're just starting out, what do? So you get over to free-ebooks.net, put your book up there for free. We share it with our 5 million and growing members, and you get the chance to grow a community of avid fans. And then you can take that and leverage it if you self-publish, or if you go to one of the publishers and say, hey, I've got this great book. Would you like to publish it? I've got the power of free-ebooks.net behind me. I've created this great community, and they're going to be saying, yeah, absolutely. So with that, I want to tell you a little bit about our guest. He's been able to write a number of novels while working full-time in his career as a manager of technology professional services. And he didn't get himself published in the traditional manner, so he went to self-publishing. And one of the problems with self-publishing, of course, is you have to do a lot of the marketing yourself. And now he's retired, and he's able to reintegrate his efforts to write, and is currently working on his third novel. So with that, I'd like to ask DJ Vallone to join us. How are you doing today?
Doing well, Scott. Thank you.
Awesome. So you're in the beautiful Sunshine State of Arizona.
Yeah, we have plenty of sunshine here, probably more than we need right about now.
Awesome. And I'm in the city of Eternal Spring, still in Medellin. And let's talk a little bit about your writing process. You were working full time. Was it like a hobby to write your books, or was it something you were just driven to do, or what was going on with you? Because I know a lot of people, they work, they get home, they have a glass of wine, they sit back, they watch, well, Netflix now or whatever, and their life just goes past them, and before you know it, they've accomplished very little except their career. So writing a book to me is a huge accomplishment.
Well, thank you. And it is an accomplishment, but one that eluded me for a while. Actually, I started in the early 1990s with a desire to write, to communicate my ideas, my opinions on, certain topics that I thought would be valuable, and I wanted to share them with others. And I had a number of false starts, if you will, trying to essentially write nonfiction. Every time I read back my own writing, it sounded sort of pedantic, very preachy. It wasn't at all something I'd want to read. So I shelved it for a while. But I think writing was an outlet for me at the time. I had, 2 young teenagers, then ultimately kids in high school when I started my first novel. And, a pretty high pressure job. It demanded a lot of me. And this was an outlet. This was a hobby, I guess, that I undertook to find my own sanity, really, and to enjoy private time. I guess it's the loneliest job in the world, as writers have said, and I found that to be true. But at the same time, I needed that, and that's really how I got started.
Cool.
But more to the point about why I wrote, why I ultimately published a couple of novels, is that I guess after giving it some thought and having some false starts, I recognized that what I wanted to communicate was better if I put it into dramatic form, into a novel form. The thematic material could come out without being harsh or without being over the top. And it also could be entertaining. And that's really how I got onto the idea that maybe I should be a novelist and not any other type of writer.
I've read some articles by other authors, and I think quite a few people come up with the same conclusion you did. It's like, I have this thing I want to say, but maybe it's politically incorrect, or a little bit out there, or even, I just don't feel like I can communicate it just as a nonfiction piece. And so they want to tell it in the form of a story. And of course, a story is one of the major ways that we learn, that we share values, that we grow as people, that we move forward. And it sometimes can get us beyond the filters that we put up, right? If you have someone at the top and he's preaching or he's lecturing, so oftentimes our walls come up and we don't think about what it is that they're saying. But when you tell it as a story and you have different characters portraying different aspects of what it is that you want to communicate, it's a really powerful way to share your thoughts and your values and your ideas about life in this world.
It may be the most fundamental and the oldest form of teaching when you think about it. And little children, of course, what do they want every night before they go to bed? Tell me a story, Daddy. Tell me a story, Mommy. Stories are a great way to communicate and to help to cement in the minds of others, what's important, what is acceptable, what's a cultural norm, for example.
Right. So I'm going to bring up your two books, and let me just see if I can click the right thing here. There you go. And let's talk a little bit first about For the Love of Freedom and how you came up with that idea, and a little bit about what it's about. And then we'll move to Untrained Hearts.
Okay. Well, For the Love of Freedom is a political novel. It's really a modern myth. It deals with one of the principal concepts that we appreciate in society, and that is freedom. Our freedom to do certain things, our freedom to be unmolested in society and so forth. But what's important about this and why it's sort of a myth is that the main character, a guy named Chip Halick, is like in many myths, he possesses a superpower of sorts. And that is he's able to essentially distill the meaning from the truth that he uncovers when he's doing his reporting. And as such, as a reporter that has this ability, becomes quite successful, kind of in the backstory, which we don't go into too much in the book, but he becomes quite successful, and he's essentially devoting his career to doing political reporting, especially about the Michigan governor. And the Michigan governor at the time is undergoing a re-election campaign, and he's also quite popular on one side of the political spectrum because of his ideology and his beliefs, and he's able to rally a lot of voters, and he's able to give rousing political speeches and so forth. Nevertheless, what Chip finds out is that freedom is a concept that doesn't really have a center. It sort of gets molded and shaped by whomever is defining it at the time. One person's freedom and one person's understanding and concept of freedom may be completely different than another. And when you get into the political environment, of course, freedom can be used as a wedge, or the lack of freedom to do certain things can be used as a wedge by one side of the political aisle against the other, and vice versa. So, this concept lacks the center of gravity, and he's sort of embroiled in trying to uncover the truth and trying to reveal the truth about the rhetoric that's flying around in the political space.
It sounds like a book that you wrote last month. You could have written last month.
It's interesting. I wrote this book 20 years ago, and it's still relevant today, at least in my opinion.
From what you just said, I thought if you'd have told us you just launched it or just finished it a couple months ago, nobody would have batted an eye because it sounds very relevant to what we're going through right now.
And I don't know why things don't seem to change in the political world.
Right.
But it's like the age-old methodology of how to get people to follow you, how to get people to, support your platform, is to appeal to kind of their baser feelings and where they feel threatened. And if you try to take away someone's freedom, they're going to feel threatened. And essentially,
Right.
that's the theme of the book.
Nice, beautiful. And the second book, oh, by the way, so in the comments, I have put the link, and I have the link up here. I wish Amazon, for such a huge company, I mean, like one of the biggest in the world, you would think that they could come up with a very nice URL instead of all these letters and stuff. So, but I put it in the comments. Just go down below for comments, check out the book. And the second one is, I'll just bring it right up there, Untrained Hearts.
Okay, well, a little bit of the backstory on this, and not about the book itself, but about me and why I wrote it, is that, I wrote the other book, For the Love of Freedom, first. And at the time, in the late 1990s, I guess naively thought that I could go find a publisher and get my book into print. But I had no history as an author. I had no following. I had no notoriety. And consequently, it was difficult, to say the least, to get a publisher interested. I still have a collection of all of the rejection letters, that I got back at that time. They're suitable for framing. And one of the things that I heard a lot, and might have been just a perfunctory answer that you get from publishers, it was, well, this isn't the subject matter that we feel we want to go into at this moment. This isn't what we want to publish at this moment. And I took that to kind of to understand that politics was a subject that book publishers wanted to stay away from because it was too controversial. So in my mind, I thought, well, maybe I could write something that has more mass market appeal. And I came up with this concept, which turned into the book Untrained Hearts. Now, this is a completely different, it's a departure from what I started out as. If you wanted to define me as a writer, you would say, well, this had to be written by somebody else. It's completely different. It's essentially a love story. It's not a romance novel. It doesn't use that kind of formula at all. But it is a love story, and it's a book about a divorced couple who had 20 years of marriage. I guess by all accounts, it was a successful marriage. But they find themselves now apart, separated, divorced, and living 2,000 miles away from each other. And they are undertaking to live, the life of a single person again, with all of the attendant trials and difficulties and frustrations. And they're finding that, life isn't as easy as they might have thought. It's not as fun. It's not as, it's not necessarily better. So they're struggling. They are finding also that their hearts, they're unreliable. They can't really depend on what they feel and what they think. Much like when you're young and in love, you can't really depend on how you think and feel and what you feel in your heart. I think that happens again for people in this case in their 40s who are now divorced and living lives on their own. So the book is about how they struggle to try to find love and what experiences they have to go through and how they have to try to understand themselves. What will be the end result? Well, I guess you have to read the book to find out.
Brilliant way to end that. Because you don't want to give, so now we have to go and get the book and find out, because to me, I think you just described the lives of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And at different stages of their life, not just people in their later stages of their lives, but people in their 30s and 40s who have been with someone for 10 or more years, and all of a sudden they have to relearn things that they forgot because they never had to, spend any time attracting another person. I think that's a great story. Thank you for sharing it.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right. So the big question that everybody wants the answer to is, how many ideas and false starts does it take to settle on a story and eventually complete a novel?
Right. I don't know that there's a single answer to that, because it just depends on every individual, their level of ambition, what they're willing to accept in terms of their own work product. I, for example, wasn't happy with a lot of what I did, so I kept discarding it. I probably filled a landfill with yellow dog paper in the early days because I didn't start out writing with a word processor. I started out writing on a tablet, and when I'd be disappointed with it, I would just throw it out. And ultimately,
so did you ever show what you wrote to other people before you threw it out, or did you just look at it and say, it's gone?
I shared it with my wife, and she has a background in teaching English, so she was helpful in a number of ways.
Right.
Yeah, and she wasn't hypercritical. I think I was more critical of my own writing than she was.
Because you reminded me of, and I believe it was Stephen King, who wrote one of his big novels in the beginning when he was just starting, and just took it, was mad at it, didn't like it, threw it in the garbage. And so this could be an urban legend, and I'm just making it up. I don't know. But his wife comes along, sees it, pulls it out of the garbage, starts reading it, and says, honey, this is great. And it became, I don't know, The Shining or Salem's Lot or something like that. So, and I'm sure with many revisions until he was happy with it. But sometimes I believe that we are our own worst critics, and particularly when it's creative, whether it's drawing or painting or sculpting or pottery or writing, and the way that we look at things can be very different than the way other people do. And I can remember making one of the ugliest little clay, and it was supposed to be like an arrowhead, that people would find, if it's 100 years old that someone shot, and except it wasn't anything like it. And I gave it to my dad as, I don't know, I guess be 12 or 13 years old as his birthday present. He was like, oh yeah, it's nice. And I'm like, yeah, he doesn't really. And of course, years later, I'm sitting in his den, and I look up, and there on the shelf is this little ugly fake arrowhead. He loved it, right? Because it was coming from me and coming from love and everything else, and it just warmed my heart. And so I always think it's good. Just because we have an opinion of something doesn't mean that it doesn't have value and shouldn't be put out there.
Well, I think I learned a lot from my career. I was in a very highly competitive industry, and in order to succeed, you had to be better than everybody else, or you could just get along maybe at a mediocre level, but you wouldn't have a high degree of success. In the role that I had, my company was demanding from me 20 to 30% growth every year for my office.
Wow.
And in order to do that, you just had to get better and better and better. And I think I took that education in the real world, if you will, into my private life and into what I was trying to do with writing. I recognized that it's kind of ironic. Good is the enemy of great, as has been said, but great is also the enemy of good. And so you have to find the middle ground. I mean, if you're to the point where you're content with something, it could be better, but there's always something else that could be done to improve your work. You have to know where's the point where, okay, it's better than good, it's almost great, it might be great, but I have to stop now because this is where we need to take the next step.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not like you're in a race and once you've finished the race, you're done.
No, you're constantly improving. And I mean, I look back at my earlier novels now, and Of course, there are things I would change. I would certainly improve some of the punctuation, which was perhaps the weakest area that I had. It's not awful, but it could have been better. I could have submitted it to some copy editor who probably would have fixed a lot of those little things. I don't think that they're that distracting, but they bother me now because I'm better now. I think I know more about how to properly punctuate, and I would do it slightly differently. But, at the time, I had gone through multiple revisions with both of my books, in the dozens of times. And I think that this is getting back to your original question. How much effort does it take to complete a novel? It's how much effort are you willing to put in to get to the point where you feel, or maybe objectively it could be said, that this novel is worthy of publication and that people will appreciate it and that they will feel as though it's been professionally done, and it represents not only the ideas of the novel, the theme of the novel, but it represents good use of the language. I think the use of the language part is something I love more than anything else. I love the English language, and I like being able to use it effectively.
That's important. And I keep hearing that we're losing like 400 words a year and everything's getting dumbed down. So I'm excited to hear that you want to use it all, because when you read books that are 80 years old, the English is beautiful.
It really is.
It really is. And it's really sad to lose that. And I think that's one of the key things about reading is you're able to just sit there and I'll sit and read, and I will appreciate, well-written books, not just, I'll get absorbed into it and I'll come into that world. But I also afterwards have this appreciation for, wow, like the way they put the scenes together and the way everything flowed, and the words that they used oftentimes are not words that I see every day. And it's sort of like, oh, nice. And I like it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I would say going back in time, decades, you find people who are more careful with the language. I know that it's sort of in vogue, it's in fashion to use a lot of street language and colloquial language in a book today. And that's fine. I'm not criticizing it in any way. But I think that the other side of the spectrum is you go and you read, say, the Russian writers, for example. They weren't even writing in English, but the translations of their books into English shows you such a rich tapestry of the language and how to communicate meaning through the language. And it's really, it's eye-opening. It's a revelation. It changes you, really. It opens your world.
Particularly when you juxtaposition that against today's, let's just say, news cycle that is, grade 4 level English usually, and dumbed down, and now all of a sudden and it's so, when you think about it, why is the right and the left, or the liberals and the conservatives, unable to come to any sort of middle ground or even close to it? Like, it feels like all out war. It's because they don't have the language to be able to communicate the meaning. They use a word, and the definition on the right side is almost the opposite of the definition on the left side. And you listen to these two sides talk, and it's kind of like, are they even talking about the same issue? Are they? You just brought up, for me, it's because they don't have a common language and they don't agree on definitions, and they have such few words with which to, like the Eskimos have 50 words for snow.
Right. Or maybe they're just clever hucksters.
Or they're clever hucksters.
Which is a point that I make in For the Love of Freedom, is that, you can use the language and you can use rhetoric to get across a point fairly effectively, even though it's not true. It may be designed to get you to think something or to believe something that is entirely false, but spoken in such a clever way and in such an elegant way that you swallow it.
Yeah, no one can agree with that, right? Perfect. So tell us about the book that you're working on now.
Okay, well, the book I'm working on now is a coming of age story. It takes place in the, so, well, let me go back first and say that you have to write what you know. And I think I did that with my first two novels. There's certain aspects of my experience that's in both of those books, whether it's the setting or whether it's drawing characters based upon people that I've met or I've known throughout my life, and sharing experiences that are similar or bear some kind of similarity to things that I've gone through and witnessed. And I think this new book is something like that as well, because the setting is the period of life where I grew up, the 60s and 70s, which was a tumultuous time by any objective measure, a
Yes.
time where the societal, norms were being changed, and the whole world was in upheaval, and the drug culture began to take hold and have an impact on a number of people. So the protagonist in this story is a young man who's entering that point in his life where all of a sudden he starts having interests that he didn't have before. He's ill-equipped to handle relationships. He's very impetuous. He keeps failing at what he's trying to do, and yet he's not willing to go backward and do it again, because it's his firm belief that life needs to be lived in a forward direction. So a lot of what he does is failing, but at least he's failing forward, and he keeps finding new things to get interested in. The book obviously has a lot to do with his romantic interests, and so he meets a series of different girls who he becomes interested in, develops a relationship with, and they alter him. They alter his perception of life, and they alter his way of thinking. They alter his own sort of interest, what he wants to do in life. It helps to shape him and put him into a direction. But just as quickly, they disappear, and he moves on to the next thing and the next thing. And so the novel takes place during a period of this young man's life, between about the ages of 14 through 24. It's a very formative part of life.
Yes.
And he struggles. He struggles with a lot of things. He fails a lot. And yet he keeps moving forward, and he keeps trying to figure out where is that one elusive person, because his life isn't complete until he finds that soulmate that he envisions for himself. And that's the quest that he has throughout the course of the book.
Beautiful. Sounds like must read.
Well, I hope so.
Well, DJ, thank you for joining us. I really appreciated our conversation. And everybody, head into the comments, check out DJ's books, buy them, read them, leave reviews, and let's get the word out about these great books. For people that are just starting out as authors, DJ, do you have any advice for, like, one tip, one piece of advice for an author who might be struggling to get their book out of them? I mean, not out
of them. Yeah. If you want to write. There's kind of an axiom that if you want to be good at something, spend 10,000 hours doing it.
Right.
Now, that's a lot of time, right? It's 5 years worth of work. And I don't want to say that you can't publish a book or you can't finish a book without, first of all, practicing for 5 years. But the underlying principle is, I think, true. The more you write, the more comfortable you'll become writing, the better you'll become writing. And
Yes.
the more you'll find your voice, which I think is extremely important. We don't really know what it is up front. It's like learning everything, right? Learning how to walk. You can't walk until you've fallen a number of times. And I think that's what has to happen with writing as well.
So I want to do the flip side of what you just said and tell you the good news, because I was watching a TED Talk by somebody who brought up the 10,000 hour rule, and he said the good news about it is to get somewhat competent at something, Like to be the expert and excellent requires talent and the 10,000 hours. If you want to be Fred Astaire dancing level sort of thing. You have to have the talent to get to Fred Astaire in addition to, so I could do 20,000 hours. I would never be as good as Fred Astaire because I don't have his talent. But of course, some people would say the practice brings the talent. But anyway, to get back to my point, this fellow said it takes 20 hours to get to a certain level of competency. So I don't know any Spanish. I'm learning Spanish, and I'll be able to have a rudimentary conversation and not feel like I'm in grade 1 after about 20 or maybe in my case 40 hours of learning and practicing Spanish. Particularly if you do it in a compressed, if you do 40 hours over 2 or 3 years, then it's not going to make any difference, I don't think. But if you compress it, and so this person was saying you start out at sort of at 0, and then you can get up to here, and then you're competent. So in other words, you can take a pen to paper and make words, right? And then the 10,000 hours takes you to where you get to the expert.
Right, and I think that the companion thought to that is that you need to celebrate each stage.
Yes,
I feel good about where you are. Always striving is a good sort of way to drive yourself, and you always want to get better, but you also need to take a moment and recognize that you've gotten somewhere, even if it's an elementary or rudimentary point on the scale, that you're able to, for example, have a 5-minute conversation in Spanish, and you didn't have to hunt for every word that you had to speak, and you understood maybe 50-60% of what the other person said. I mean, that's an accomplishment when you're learning a language.
I want to say a word, and I'm trying to figure out which one of 2 words is the correct word, and I'm going, at least I'm trying to pick between 2 words instead of going, I have no clue, which is where I was a couple weeks ago. So, you remind me, DJ, of when I was I guess it would be about between 8 and 10, my family went to Melbourne, Australia. And when we were there, this is in the late 60s, we went to Ayers Rock. And in those days, you could actually climb up to the top, and there was a book that you could write your name in. And I remember, and it was like hot, and the big thing is huge. And I remember climbing up, and it's steep. So I'm basically just looking at the rock, and I can't see anything else, right? And I'm going, I'm getting tired.
Somebody said, don't look down.
Well, I stopped at one point, and I said, this is crazy. I'm not getting anywhere. And I stopped, and then I turned around and I looked down, and the cars were so small. So in other words, I had made this huge accomplishment thinking that I wasn't getting anywhere. And I think oftentimes we have that same experience where we're writing, we don't think we're getting anywhere, but if we just stopped and looked, there's 200 pages of writing that you've done, and it can apply to, all of the things that we do in life, I think. But to take that moment, look back, see how far you've come is a really important thing in our lives, and then celebrate it, as you said. That was a great point.
That's great. This has been a real pleasure, Scott. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it too, DJ. And if you've enjoyed this, head over to, let me just bring them both up. Head over to Amazon, get Untrained Hearts, and then head over and get For Love of Freedom. They're both in the comments, all right? And then head over to free-ebooks.net and look for more new up-and-coming authors and their books, and you'll be able to read them for free and support the authors at the same time. And that's really what we're all about. So thank you for joining us, DJ. Really appreciate you and having you on the show. And thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next time. And one thing I forgot was make sure that you like, share, subscribe, hit the bell if you're on YouTube. And if you're not on YouTube or you're somewhere else, share it with your friends so that we can expose these authors to more and more people around the world. So we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.